Good evening and welcome to the Legion Cantina. In today's episode, we're going to go through the Rebel Mercenary Commander Wicket, and we're going to talk about his strengths, his weaknesses, what kind of equipment you should take him with, and how you can use him in game. So, as we normally do, we're going to start off by going through Wicket's unit card. Now, there's quite a few keywords going on here, so I'll try and just go through and explain them as best I can. Top one is Independent Dodge 1, which is super nice. So, Wicket is a Bright Tree mercenary, so unless your commander, your rebel commander, has underworld connections, not going to be able to give him an order, but being able to generate that Independent Dodge 1 is really nice. Other keywords, he's got low profile and nimble. So low profile, knocking a hit off automatically if he's in cover, and nimble means that if you spend a dodge during your defense die step, you gain a dodge back. So it's pretty strong, and again, it just makes him really tough and difficult to deal with if he's in cover. Next keyword, relentless, so he can make a melee or a ranged attack after making a move action. This is really nice. Most of the time it's going to operate as charge, although occasionally you are going to be chucking that one black dice with Pierce 1 in the hope of getting that one wound off, which is quite nice. Next keyword, scouting party and scout. You can take, I think it's called Forest Dwellers, the 3-point upgrade that gives him a dodge on turn 1 and an extra scout. So scout 2 on two sort of Bright Tree units is really nice with that scouting party. Should be noted it is only Bright Tree units that can take this, and they can't already have scout, but this is quite a nice utility, and I'll go into this more later as to why this is a really useful part of Wicket's kit. Sharpshooter 2, so if you are throwing that ranged attack out, you never have to worry about cover. Not that that ranged attack is going to go off super often, but when it does, you are just looking at that one Pierce 1 if you do get it through. And unhindered, so heavy cover, not a problem, can go through that stuff, which is, depending on the board, really nice, but often won't come off during a game, but when it does, you're going to be really grateful that you have it. He can take 3 training options. Normally, you're only going to be taking 1 or 2, but occasionally you will be grateful for that 3rd training slot. I think he would be more useful if he had a gear slot to go with this, but he's fine with just the 3 training slots. 5 health, 2 courage, this fairly standard, maybe a little bit on the low side, but he does have the defensive tech to be able to deal with it. Surge crit and surge to defense, which is really nice for Wicket, and his 2 weapons are in melee. He's throwing red, red, black with Pierce 1, and at range 1 to 2, he can throw 1 black dice with Pierce 1 and primitive. So he's an interesting character, like in that sort of not like dirt cheap, but is definitely on the cheaper side of things. You can normally get him with full kit for sort of 70, 75-ish points, which is really nice. And he can sort of play a key role in your army depending on how you use him. So, going through his strengths and his weaknesses. Firstly, his strengths. Nimble and independent dodge is a great combination, plus low profile. The reason nimble and independent dodge is so good is that a big problem with getting nimble to go off is making sure you have a dodge on the unit in the first place. This guarantees, apart from if you're giving Wicket an order, which isn't going to happen super often in Rebel list, because generally you're going to be either you don't have Underworld or you'll be looking to give other sort of maybe more priority units an order first. So Wicket's fine. He's not sort of order hungry in that way. Other units can take the order instead of him, and he can grab that independent dodge 1. The other sort of quite nice thing about him that adds up surprisingly often is the relentless plus pierce combo lets you chip off damage pretty well. With these sort of small dice pools with pierce, it's not exactly the same as like Han or something, for instance, but generally his spear is going to be just over 2 pierce 1, and his sling is sometimes 1 pierce 1, sometimes it's nothing. But it does mean if you do get those attacks through against kind of any quality of opponent, aside from like units with impervious or immune pierce, you are going to be guaranteed to get 1 or hopefully 2 wounds through with his spear. The main reason you're going to be taking Wicket, though, is for the teamwork, layer, and dodge synergy that Rebels are so reliant on these days. I say reliant, the lists I build are reliant on them. There are other ways to do Rebels, but the lists I build are very reliant on this synergy. So the big change has been obviously Lair getting Exemplar, and that means that with the 2-pip, I think it's called Beautiful Friendship, I'll put it on screen for you now, that gives them teamwork. It means that whenever one of them, Lair, Wicket, gets a dodge, the other one gets a dodge as well. This also procs off Nimble. This will also proc off Wicket's independent dodge 1. So it basically means at the start of the turn, you get a dodge on Wicket and you get a dodge on Leia. It also means that if either of them are being attacked and they're generating dodges through Nimble, that just means more defensive tech for the other one to deal with. It also means if you're firing off take cover 2 or 3 with Leia, that you'll be generating extra dodges on Wicket as well, which can be super useful, as I'll go into in a second. As I said earlier, pretty cheap, 80 points, under 80 points full kit normally. Yeah, which is surprisingly cheap, and like actually he can be effective in game as not necessarily a damage dealer, but as a part of your army and sort of more disruption for your opponents to have to deal with. Scout and Scouting Party are extremely valuable now in 2.6. You can see the recent change for Recon Intel now up to 8 points. So Wicket getting that for free and giving it to friendly units as well, some of which can actually be really useful themselves, is pretty powerful. So don't underestimate that Scouting Party 2 keyword. And finally, Bright Tree, still really fun. Like chucking a load of Ewoks on the board, especially with the Mega Squads now, is really fun, but not super competitively viable. So he is part of a fun list, just maybe not a super competitive list. In terms of weaknesses, if he is ever caught without a dodge, he becomes far more vulnerable, and especially if he is caught out of cover. Essentially, what will happen is if he has his dodge and is in heavy cover, provided you've given him situational awareness, which I think you normally always should, but I'll go into that later, it means he's automatically shrugging off 2 hits from any dice pool. It also means that if he is being attacked in heavy cover, a lot of the time, unless they're throwing lots of crits through, you're probably going to shake off, again, a third of those hits as well. So it means he probably can't be one-shot by all but the most aggressive, perhaps Super Gar squad or something going for him in one go. And as soon as they're taking multiple shots to finish off Wicket and he's generating dodges with Nimble and he's got that low profile and he's sticking around, he becomes really annoying and really frustrating to deal with. And he's not that expensive, so it's difficult for your opponent to justify spending all those resources to have a go at Wicket. Another slight issue with Wicket is his command cards are not super good. His 1-pip's interesting. It gives him outmaneuver speed 1, but he can't. Speed 3, but he can't make attacks. That's fine. He should normally have outmaneuver anyway from the situational awareness that you should give him. So all it's really giving him is speed 3. And if you're playing an entire command card and losing your independent dodge 1 to play that, not sure that's really what we should be doing. His 2-pip, again, only orders him, which is a downside. The sneaky scouting's okay. Getting the ability to give surge to hit when they spend those observation tokens is quite nice. But yeah, again, just not quite the sort of power command card that you're looking to play these days. His 3-pip is the most interesting and is the one I kind of bring most often, just because it can occasionally... Firstly, the flat courage is fantastic. Like, if you are being suppressed, and often Ewoks with low profile are going to be suppressed, and they're only courage 1, so getting that flat courage and just being able to run up, tag an objective or something is really nice. But again, it's perhaps not the flashiest 3-pip in the world, and it's kind of only taken if there aren't any better options. The biggest downside to his mercenary it being a Bright Tree and not being a core rebel option is that it messes around with your orders and it messes around with Exemplar. Most of the time, if you are running him with Leia, you're going to try and keep them at range 2 of each other, which would be ideal if she was able to Exemplar her dodges onto him if he was being shot. But because he's a mercenary, you're not able to do that. And that is a genuine downside to being able to run those two together. And it does come up surprisingly often. His damage output isn't incredible, especially in this day and age with the power that some units are throwing down. So basically, you're just using Wicket more as like an annoyance rather than somebody who's going to actually run in and finish off a unit by himself. But if you can tie up a force user or a unit that's meant to be a ranged unit and doesn't have a great melee profile, he will be surprisingly effective. Especially if you can load him up with dodges beforehand, that really can bog down a big enemy force user or a big hero or whatever they're using. And as I've already hinted at, relies on Layer 2 to unlock his full potential, but he can still kind of hold his own without her. But when you put the two of them together, it really can develop into a pretty powerful combination. In terms of recommended upgrades, I think you should always take Forest Dwellers. I think you should always take Situational Awareness. I've played a lot of Wicket and a lot of Layer together, and When you take Forest Dwellers and you automatically generate 1 dodge on turn 1, even if you give Wicket an order with Forest Dwellers, it does just mean that for that little bit of chip damage that maybe is being thrown out at range 4, and you can exemplar a dodge with Leia early on, feels really good. And like, I'll come in more into this later, but when you play Leia and Wicket right, it is really satisfying, and it does like make you feel, even if you're not, makes it feel like you're good at the game and you're doing things in a smart way. So he is a very rewarding character to play. Situational awareness. I think this one is less of a must take than it used to be with the old cover rules. But the reason I think it is still an auto take on Wicket is because he is one of the few characters in the game where he's probably going to have enough dodges that crits become relevant again, even after you've only taken off maybe a hit or two less than you might have done with heavy cover before. So it might feel a bit counterintuitive, but I think situational awareness on Wicket will pay off more than you expect. And if you are coming up against a hero or a unit with surge to crit, it really can be quite nice if you're being hit by a force user or something, just to take off a few of those crits rather than letting them all go through as just if there are the crits that you wouldn't normally be able to deal with. For the third training slot, I wouldn't personally take either of these, but these are the two I see taken most often when other people run him. Tenacity and endurance. He has only courage 2, so endurance is quite nice because he might be being quite shot quite a lot, so they might just try and suppress him off the board. But again, if they're doing that, you're kind of happy, so I don't think endurance is super necessary. And tenacity again, like Wicket probably will take a little bit of chip damage, and if you want that spear to go to red black, which again I think takes you just over 3 hits on average, takes you to like 3 PS1, which is pretty good. But again, I'm not really personally running Wicket for his damage output. He's more of like a utility piece and kind of just there to kind of slow people down and chip off a wound here and there with his relentless. So I think auto take Forest Dwellers and situational awareness, and then look at the others later on. But that's just my opinion. List building tips. I've already said put him with Leia. Their synergy, their teamwork synergy is fantastic. Leia getting Exemplar is great, and they are, as a combination, really quite cheap. Like normally the way I run Leia brings her in and around 90. Add Wicket onto that, he's normally coming in sort of 77-ish. You're paying like less than 170 points for 2 heroes, which are both really good, and like really support what your army is trying to do. So I think that's really good. And definitely in terms of rebel commanders these days, like Han is not bad. I think the rebel officer's okay, and obviously there's the reworks coming for like Lando and hopefully Jin and Cassian. But for now, I think Leia and Wicket, really nice combination, and they both really just help support what your army's doing and kind of protect the rest of your units in a really helpful way. The scouts to slingers and skirmishers is really nice. I think there is a temptation to be really aggressive with this and try and chuck them up and maybe even try and sneak off a cheeky shot, which you definitely can do if an opponent leaves a unit out in the open, especially with the big slinger squad. You know, throwing 10 black is pretty good. But I wouldn't necessarily see it as a way to deal early damage, more just moving up your unit, guaranteeing that heavy cover, because any Ewok unit in heavy cover getting that low profile becomes incredibly difficult to shift, especially those big squads where they have to work through 10 Ewoks with low profile and sort of white surging saves, as long as you're not giving them an order on the slingers. So yeah, that's kind of how I see Wicket Scout. Not necessarily as a way to deal damage turn 1, but as a way to put yourself in a good position for moving into turn 2, because none of those 3 in this list, the slingers, the skirmishers, and Wicket, will be getting an order on the second turn. So you want them in a good spot in heavy cover, being able to resist that damage. The way I really like to use him in an ideal world, and it's very satisfying when you can pull it off, is to try and load him up with as many dodges as you can and just chuck him at an enemy force user, because as soon as you can get more than 2, so 3 plus effectively dodges on him, he becomes incredibly frustrating for an opponent's force user to deal with, because most force users with one swing of their lightsaber are dealing 4 to 5 damage normally with PS2. If you're able to dodge away 3 of those straight away, and you're then only left with 2 PS2 and you're still on 3 health, a force user has spent their entire turn, unless they, chuck an aim on there to maybe add a bit more damage, to do maybe like 2 or 3 damage to Wicket, who's like a 75 point unit. And that is really nice. It also means that he can kind of like perform this sort of, I think they call it, like people call it like a linebacker role, which if you have range 2 units like I'm going to say Han, but you know, slingers, sleeper cell, things like that want to be operating in that close range but are afraid of big scary melee units, he can be used to kind of protect against that and just give you like a bit more of like an aura of defense around where Wicket is. The other things I mentioned earlier is he's not order hungry. Like his independent dodge one is great, and it does mean that like you can afford, as long as he's in heavy cover, to not give him an order early and just see when he comes out the stack, because he's less order sensitive most of the time than in this list, for instance, Luke and Bad Batch, who will be the ones who'll be hogging most of the orders. Now we're going to talk about how you can use him or deploy him, maybe more accurately, in two different deployments. So again, I've just picked kind of one that is a bit more ideal and one that's maybe a bit less ideal. So the one that kind of suits Wicket in this case, well, to be fair, both of them, neither of these are bad. They're just kind of different, I guess. But for Recover the Research, generally what you'll be looking to do with Wicket is you're hoping to go with him kind of in the middle of your turn, and like it's not worth, depending on whether or not you're giving him an order, it's not usually worth holding him right till the end, because normally you're going to have more effective units or units that could realistically be shooting the opponent that you'll want to go with later on in the turn. But with Wicket, what you're looking to do is he's going to have his scout move, he's going to have his normal move, and then you have another action with which you can sort of decide as appropriate what you want to do. The one thing I would not advise is scout, move into an aggressive position, so you can either get in there with your spear or go for the sling. Because firstly, if you're pushing up that aggressively with Wicket on turn 1 and your opponent has somehow got a unit into the middle of the board that is in melee range, he is then going to be so exposed on turn 2 that he will probably then automatically die. So that's not how you want to be using his scout move. You can occasionally go for his sort of range 2 sling, but again, that's not how I would see Wicket Scout. What I would see Wicket Scout is you can often just scout move in, do a normal move, and then you can either take a dodge or you can take a standby. And basically what you're looking to do is you're looking to just be in a spot that can be within range 2 of Leia for the start of the next turn, so that she can get that free dodge at the start of the turn, and you can get that sort of synergy going, which is exactly, well, what I tend to build a lot of my lists around these days. So I would not advise just absolutely charging in there really aggressively, because firstly, if you do get Wicket there, he's not really going to pay off in terms of damage. Like, he's most of the time only doing 2 Pierce 1 with his melee weapon, which is not worth him charging in aggressively and losing that dodge synergy early on for. But use that scout to just position him well, get him into cover, and then if you do have that action left over, there's nothing wrong with taking an extra dodge, because if he's got situational awareness and say they have like a tank or some commandos or something at the back that can just plink things off normally, he can resist that kind of damage, because with his forest dwellers and with that extra dodge or something, he'll be looking at a couple of dodges and in heavy cover and low profile, and a lot of units are really going to struggle to put meaningful damage past that. And if they're burning an action to shoot at Wicket, then that's absolutely fine. Like, that's how you can kind of use him. For Close the Pocket, what I would tend to use the scout move for here is, rather than focusing sort of where the opponent is, here we're imagining we're the blue player and the opponent is the red player. What I would use the scout move here is to try and get more central, because what you can use Wicket for, especially if there's some nice heavy cover or some LOS blocking, is you can use him to kind of hedge towards the center of the board, because that's kind of where you're going to want Leia to be. So if we imagine deploying on this right hand side, you can use your scout move and your normal move and then probably taking another dodge or a standby, but by that point you're quite close to the center already, and you can use Wicket to, if you want to later on in the turn, in the following turn or something, you can just charge in and then you'll be contesting that spot and you'll probably have a couple of dodges and it will be really difficult to shift you off that point. So again, not using Wicket's scout to sort of get in there and try and deal some damage, but just using it to position yourself for the following turn is more how I would see using that scout move. And again, like, all of this is kind of built around, where is Leia going to end up? Can you always be at range 2? Because I would nearly always currently recommend running these two together as a combination, because I think Leia is probably the best rebel commander, and I think Wicket is the best support to Leia in that regard. And if you can keep them sort of in that bubble with your other rebel units, it's going to make them much harder to deal with than if sort of Leia and Wicket were just slightly too far apart to support each other. So yeah, I think personally, we'll come to the tier list now. I think personally, for Rebels, Wicket is right up there. I think it's interesting whether or not you can rate him S tier, because I think a lot of his effects sort of go a bit under the radar. So I think in terms of like how it's going to feel in game, he's rarely going to like make an attack or anything that's going to like blow an opponent's unit off the board. But just the amount of value he gets and how frustrating he can be for your opponent to deal with, I think is very powerful. So I'm not going to put him in S tier this time, but I am going to put him right at the top of A tier, just below the sleeper cell who we rated last time. But yeah, let me know what you think. I think Wicket is a really strong piece of the rebel army right now, and he's definitely one of the best commander options that the rebels have going at the moment. But yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.